Welcome back to Season 3 of 12 Days in March. In this presentation, we'll take on the important topic of prolactin and related disorders. We ran out of time during the course, but this topic has lots of high-yield material, so I wanted to get right to it before you sit for Step 1. You'll notice the title focuses on building questions, as this topic lends itself to identifying and reinforcing the major derivatives as we go. As with all presentations, a PDF is available for download at the 12 Days website. So here is the outline we will use. It is vital that you understand the basic physiology because virtually all the derivatives that follow are based on this background. In fact, if you understand the physiology, you can easily deduce and reason your way through the entire rest of the topic. Reasoning is always better than memorization. So here we go. Prolactin is secreted by acidophilic cells located in the anterior pituitary. Big deal. However, unlike other anterior pituitary hormones that are secreted in response to hypothalamic releasing factors, prolactin secretion is not stimulated per se. Instead, it is under tonic inhibition through hypothalamic release of dopamine that is sometimes referred to as prolactin inhibitory factor. Were it not for tonic inhibition, prolactin would be running wild. This is a big deal. In fact, that is our first derivative. If you antagonize dopamine, typically as an adverse effect of medications, prolactin levels will rise. That's good to know. We'll return to that shortly. The only other important regulator is TRH. You can see in the diagram that dopamine inhibition drives the bus, but as we will cover in the next section, conditions associated with a high TRH can elevate the prolactin level. Moving on, what is the key physiologic function of prolactin? Let's keep this simple. In the postpartum period, it stimulates milk production. That's the big ticket item. Yes, it is involved in mammary gland development with other hormones, but synthesis of milk is the main function. As noted, suckling or nipple stimulation will raise prolactin levels. This phenomenon is illustrated in the diagram, noting elevation of the green curve with breastfeeding. Before leaving this slide, do be aware of the role of oxytocin in lactation. It stimulates myoepithelial cells to eject milk. Prolactin is not involved in the ejection of milk. So what's our next derivative? Simple. No prolactin, no milk. That's not good. Where's this little gem going to pop up? You got it. Sheehan syndrome, which is just around the corner. Well, look at this. Derivative number 3. If too little prolactin is associated with failure of lactation, what happens with too much prolactin? You guessed it again. Hyperprolactinemia is associated with galactorrhea. That makes sense. Prolactin stimulates milk production. You're like, Sachs, slow down. This is great stuff. But I can't stop. Look at this treat. What happens to prolactin during pregnancy? Now we have estrogen flying out of control. It stimulates prolactin release. Where does the prolactin come from? The anterior pituitary. So under the influence of estrogen, the pituitary gland doubles in size during pregnancy. This enlargement occurs as a result of lactotroph hypertrophy. So the gland doubles in size, but guess what? The blood supply does not. Big gland, marginal blood supply. Sounds like a setup for ischemia. You betcha. This too is part of the Sheehan story. That is, ischemic necrosis of the anterior pituitary. Great derivatives just by understanding prolactin physiology. Interestingly, in spite of the high estrogen and prolactin levels, lactation does not begin during pregnancy. Turns out estrogen and progesterone downregulate the prolactin receptor on the breast. But, as you can see, with a precipitous drop in hormone levels at parturition, lactation does begin. And this last physiologic function will be a major piece of the prolactin curriculum as you negotiate your way through the boards. Pictured here is hypothalamic-derived GnRH, which stimulates the gonadotropic hormones LH and FSH. These are ultimately involved in normal ovulation and spermatogenesis, thereby regulating menstruation and fertility. But we're talking about the physiologic functions of prolactin. On the good, it does stimulate milk production. On the bad, at high levels, it inhibits gonadotropin-releasing hormone. And what are the consequences of inhibiting GnRH? Predictably, amenorrhea and infertility. And that is the fifth derivative. Hyperprolactinemia leads to loss of gonadotropin functions. Bringing it together, we just reviewed the regulatory pathways. We saw the purpose was to produce milk, and we can obviously make too much or not enough. We saw the collateral dysfunction associated with hyperprolactin levels on the gonadotropins, and estrogen was able to drive the lactotrophs in the pituitary for better or worse. All the derivatives are direct consequences of this discussion. Now we can easily transition into the topic of prolactin dysregulation. What does that look like? Here it is. We already said that dopamine has an inhibitory effect on prolactin secretion. So what happens when the effect of dopamine is antagonized? Bingo! Hyperprolactinemia. So who are the major dopamine antagonists? Medications, and more specifically metoclopramide and antipsychotic medications. This is a neat and easy set of derivatives. Moving on, we already saw that TRH has a stimulatory effect on lactotrophs. So how do we elevate TRH? Answer: untreated primary hypothyroidism. The TRH elevates driving TSH production, but that high value also results in lactotroph hypertrophy and signs of hyperprolactinemia, to be reviewed in a moment. Just for completeness, hypothalamic disorders can also raise the prolactin level through loss of dopaminergic inhibition. This might be seen in hypothalamic tumors, with craniopharyngioma being most likely, or infiltrative disorders such as sarcoid. In all the disorders just mentioned, how will the patient manifest their hyperprolactinemia? Of course, the NBME won't give you a high level. Instead, the patient will be described with galactorrhea. It will be up to you to do the math. So we reviewed the physiology of prolactin and plugged in the disorders of prolactin regulation. Let's get to the next major set of derivatives, focusing first on prolactin deficiency. For step 1, the prototypic disorder causing prolactin deficiency is Sheehan syndrome, or ischemic necrosis of the pituitary. Certainly any cause of pituitary failure can cause prolactin deficiency, but Sheehan's will be the syndrome most specifically associated with prolactin failure, given the association with pregnancy and lactation. So you will recall from earlier, I mentioned the pituitary gland doubles in size during pregnancy. I also mentioned that the blood supply does not keep pace. In the diagram on the right, I'll remind you that the anterior pituitary blood supply comes through the portal circulation as capillaries pass through the median eminence, getting exposed to hypothalamic releasing factors, and then travel down the infundibulum into the anterior pituitary. Compare and contrast that with the rich vascularity of the posterior pituitary supplied directly by the inferior hypophyseal artery. As such, the posterior pituitary is not prone to the same ischemic injury as the anterior pituitary. And here is the classic scenario. A woman develops hemorrhage or hypotension in the peripartum period. This is the language of ischemic necrosis of the pituitary. In this instance, the clinical manifestation of pituitary injury will be represented by the failure of lactation. These two together, hemorrhage followed by failure to lactate, is the language of Sheehan syndrome. Having made this point, you need to be aware that Sheehan's is simply a gateway condition to hypopituitarism. The failure of lactation informs you that prolactin has been rendered deficient. However, any or all of the anterior pituitary hormones may fail. So although we are focused on prolactin deficiency, it will be unusual for prolactin deficiency to travel in isolation. And here are the classic associations. The patient has Sheehan's and depressed ACTH level, but the blood pressure is maintained. Why is that? Answer: adrenal aldosterone production is an ACTH-independent process. Aldosterone synthesis is stimulated by renin and angiotensin, not ACTH. In this scenario, the patient is deficient in cortisol, but aldosterone production is preserved. Another derivative will be that of secondary hypothyroidism. Low TSH as the pituitary is injured, plus a low free T4. The patient will be described with signs and symptoms of hypothyroidism traveling in association with prolactin deficiency. And finally, the failure of lactation may be linked to a derivative such as, what other symptom might the patient have? Answer: amenorrhea. They can then turn that amenorrhea around and ask what the patient will be at risk for 30 years later. Answer: osteoporosis with fragility fracture. And finally, Sheehan's is a syndrome where you're most likely to see hypothalamic stimulation tests, and specifically with CRH or TRH. So our patient who is not lactating and has a low free T4 is given IV TRH. 30 minutes later, her TSH is measured, and it doesn't rise. What is your diagnosis? Answer: ischemic necrosis of the pituitary. Be sure not to confuse that answer with pituitary apoplexy or hemorrhage. That is a different disorder. So you can see that a simple concept like failure of lactation in the setting of post-op hemorrhage becomes an important gateway to the more detailed topic of hypopituitarism. Alright, let's finish this bad boy up by looking at the other common cause of hyperprolactinemia, that being the pituitary adenoma. Let's start with the pathology, and although we are talking about a prolactin-secreting adenoma, the pathology applies to all adenomas. They will be described by sheets or cords of uniform or monomorphic cells. Since they may or may not be encapsulated, they won't bug you with this detail. But here is the adenoma money. The adenoma is characterized by a loss of the normal reticulin network. This loss of reticulin, also described by sparse connective tissue, accounts for the gelatinous appearance of the adenoma. Okay, enough on the pathology. Let's move on to the clinical manifestations, most of which we've already mentioned. As noted, the prolactin-secreting adenoma may present with mass effects or endocrine manifestations. The mass effects, which can be seen with any pituitary adenoma, most classically causes compression of the optic chiasm. This finding is characterized by bitemporal hemianopsia. Of course, they won't see as bitemporal anything. Instead, they will describe a patient who experienced a motor vehicle accident when he didn't see a car coming from his side. Accidents are big in Philly. No one down there sees anything to their side. That's how the Liberty Bell got cracked. The other manifestation they might include is headache. And just to complete the picture, since null cell tumors don't secrete hormones, they are the lesion most apt to present with a mass effect. Likewise, men are more likely to present with a mass effect compared to premenopausal women, as amenorrhea bring these patients to medical attention earlier. And the final manifestation, the pituitary mass and its compressive effect, is hypopituitarism. The mass can impact the gland itself or hypothalamic releasing factors. This is not specific to hyperprolactinemia. Moving on to the endocrine manifestations, you should be aware that men and women experience different hormonal manifestations. Women, as we've already reviewed, will present with symptoms directly related to the prolactin elevation, namely galactorrhea. In addition, as a result of inhibition of GnRH release, women will come to medical attention earlier than men due to the presence of amenorrhea or infertility. The male does not really suffer direct effects from the elevated prolactin level. Instead, they will present with signs of hypogonadotropic hypogonadism that include erectile dysfunction, loss of libido, and conceivably infertility from loss of FSH and its effects on spermatogenesis. Insofar as prolactin adenoma as being a gateway condition, do you have a favorite association in mind? Dang it, you're good. All these signs and symptoms are a gateway to MEN1. Any patients with signs of a pituitary mass and/or endocrine manifestations of hyperprolactinemia should be considered for MEN1. Be on the lookout for hypercalcemia with associated low phosphate or a history of parathyroidectomy. These are the subtle footprints of an MEN1 syndrome. And finally, two loose ends. Be aware that prolactinomas are the most common adenoma of the pituitary. Sometimes you need this little piece of trivia to nail the correct answer. And returning to where the whole presentation began, how do we treat the adenoma? Well, if dopamine inhibits prolactin, dopamine agonists would make sense for treatment. And in fact, that is exactly how these patients are treated. Cabergoline and bromocriptine are the treatments of choice. They are both dopamine agonists. They would generally both be used before surgical management, which is the ever-popular transsphenoidal hypophysectomy. And that, my friends, is the whole enchilada. By focusing on normal physiology, it was easy to deduce all the disorders and derivatives that followed. You should be able to reason your way through any questions they toss at you come test day. And that concludes our first video of Season 3. I'm glad to be back in the saddle. If you have any questions or concerns, please email me at 12days. Thank you.